Hi there, everybody. I would like to talk to you about a big problem in the world, which is very underreported, the problem of global addressing, street addressing. So here in the US, and where I'm from in the UK, street addresses work pretty well. We might live at number 65 Main Street, but this is not the case for a lot of the world, and I'd like to talk about what that means. And you'll see that the Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto has something pretty dramatic to say about it. Without an address, you live outside the law, you might as well not exist. And I'll explain a bit about that line of thought. The UN actually says that there's 75% of the world which struggle with bad addresses. And I don't know how many of you have spent much time in the Middle East, but if you have, you will know it is very difficult to get around because places simply don't have an address, or 50 different streets in the city have the same street name. And this is really tough. It's not necessarily the countries you would think, but as well as the Middle East, there's most of Africa, India, Southeast Asia, they all suffer from street address systems that do not really work very well. And even in that 25% of the world where they do, in the US, the UK, it is very expensive, the problems that they cause. There's a stat that UPS say that if each of their drivers drove 1 mile less a day, that would be a $50 million saving per year. And that 1 mile can be caused by the problems around street addressing. It's a huge implication, the issues that they cause. And there's a big number, 4 billion people in the world, the UN say, actually live every day without an address. And that impacts their life severely. If you see, this is the Google Maps representation of Rocinha, which is Rio's largest favela. You've got one street basically running through the middle. But if you check out the satellite view, that's what it looks like. There's a lot of homes, businesses who are not even on the map, let alone have an address. And for the people without an address, they had two other problems. They were unconnected and they were unbanked, but these problems are getting solved. People now have smartphones. They now have mobile money and ways to get around the fact they didn't have a conventional bank account. And we're trying to help them get over that issue of being unaddressed without having to wait for their government to come and physically address where they are. We feel there should be a way for them to leapfrog that. And you think, well, how difficult can it be to just go and sort this out? Let's go and label every street. But this is the side of a house in Ghana where they tried to sort addressing out. And this is 3 different systems they've tried over 10 years, none of which work anymore. So the guy who lives in this house now has no way. All of these codes are basically meaningless. Street addressing is really expensive, costs tens of millions of pounds and dollars, takes decades, not years, and it's really not a very good solution, which is why the problem still persists. You might have seen this when you're traveling on TripAdvisor, opposite the Oman oil petrol pump. That's a really difficult address to work with. It's not actually registered or recognized in any search engines, but this is, we use the best available. In Costa Rica, it's pretty common to have an address like from the cemetery, 200 meters south, 300 meters west. Again, you cannot put that very easily into a search bar or onto your e-commerce site, and things work really badly. So the way we've approached this is saying, look, there's something which we could all use, and it's everywhere in the world, and we could solve this, which is latitude and longitude, GPS coordinates, because everywhere has got a latitude and longitude like this, but it is really, really difficult to use. I don't know how many of you have ever tried doing this. You might have seen it around and gone, can I put this into my search engine? It is really hard to put in 2 of those numbers and not make a mistake. And it's hard for someone to be told this and to remember it. So we've come from a position of, this is great technology that this exists, and our smartphones know these latitudes and longitudes, but let's put them into a much easier way for people to digest. And we played around with some ways of doing this, and we exploited a fact of the English dictionary and the human mind. There are enough words in the English dictionary that you can have enough combinations of 3 words that there is a combination of 3 words for every 3 meter square in the world. So that's what we've done. We've made a system where we've labeled each of the 57 trillion 3 meter squares in the world with 3 words out of the dictionary. So instead of that horrible latitude and longitude, for that 3 meter square in London, it's just called gazed across like. There's only one in the world, gazed across like. And that serves as an address. Now, in London, it may not be necessary if that has an address, but if you're somewhere where it doesn't, this system is really, really easy, and it works really, really well. So having a 3-word address for every 3 meter square in the world actually means you can use that in a lot of ways if you had no way of describing where you live. Pretty much everything in your life, all the things you take for granted, getting insurance on your house, telling the electricity board where to come and connect you, all of these things in your life need an address. And as long as you have something, if it's these 3 words that can be understood by that organization as well as you, that works. So what we did with this 3-word address code, we built an app and a website, and you can download the app. It's called what3words, and the first thing it'll do is tell you exactly where you are, the 3-word address. And you can move the map around, and it'll keep updating the 3 words. It works everywhere in the world. And if you lose connection, it'll still work and tell you where you are, but the online map will disappear. But it's a very simple, straightforward global app. But far more powerful is the fact that we made a few lines of code that anybody can drop into their app, so that then anybody can order something with 3 words, they can search with 3 words, and this works very well. So here's a few applications in the developed world of who've taken it. The world's largest offline mapping app, NavMe, have integrated it. The Glastonbury Festival, you've got the size of a town that descended on a field, they've used it. A whole load of applications, but in the developing world, in that favela I showed you, you've now got the biggest postal service of the favelas in Rio, who now use the Portuguese version of the 3 words. And you can see on there, they've now got the stickers where they put those 3 words on every single package, and their postmen have the app, and they now run a whole business based off this. We're being used to deliver light to the slums in India because there were no address systems where they wanted to operate. We're being used in Tanzania to work out where people have put mosquito traps in homes. Tanzania is pretty badly addressed. People don't know where they've been working and what's going on. The UN has built us into their disaster reporting app. So when you go to a new disaster zone, a lot of the infrastructure has been torn out. They need something to work with. 3-word address is now supported in UN Assign, which is the official app. And in the townships in South Africa, there's a very entrepreneurial young man who delivers medicine to everybody who had no way of getting their medicine while staying at home, and he now uses what3words to do that. I'd love to just run a short video, if that's possible, to show you a bit about that story and how he's doing it. Have we got the video?
What does it mean not to be on the map? To be off the grid? When you are in the bottom, it is the difference between sinking and swimming. The barrier to improving your lives. If you don't exist on a map, how can you open a bank account? How can you vote? We all must prove where we belong. If the government cannot give us an address, then we have to look to other means. My name is Sizwe Nzima, and I run a courier company that collects chronic medication parcels from public hospitals and clinics in local townships and delivers them to the patient's doorstep. I started the business because of my grandparents. So my grandparents had to go and collect chronic medication at the hospitals. And as a young boy growing up with my grandparents, I saw them experience tough times in getting the medication. And as I grew up, I had that responsibility to actually go and collect those medication. And being at the clinic and sitting in those long queues and waiting for those long hours, I actually had an experience of how bad it was. Being in an environment where you can easily be vulnerable to get sick. And that's when I told myself, let me start the business that will focus on collecting medication for people and delivering them at their doorstep. Khayelitsha is like a maze. It's not an easy place to locate addresses. You know, when we started, we experienced some challenges. So that has been proven in the past with logistics companies not being able to really work out the routes and the addresses in Khayelitsha because of the way the township is structured in terms of informal roads, informal addresses, informal housing, and so on. An app like what3words can help us expand in terms of understanding our routes better. With an app that will allow us to actually distinguish which is the shortest route, that can really help us. That can also help us store the address on the map so that we don't have to get lost again. My dream is to be able to create more structure in terms of accessing or navigating the township maze. If you order something, it has to be delivered at your doorstep. Regardless of how informal the settlement is, regardless of how structured the settlement is, getting access to medication for me is really important, and that's what I want to bring on the table.
So that's one example of how we're being used in the townships of South Africa for a logistics-based business. But in the favelas in Rio, that's one step up. There's a much bigger operation there, and we're now talking to several African postal services who have got unaddressed countries, and they want to do e-commerce, and they see that they need an immediately available solution, which we provide. So there's all sorts of applications, and really we're fairly early, but we're scratching the surface. But there's so many things that this can be used for, this technology. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ben Johnson, host of Marketplace Tech.
Curious to see if you would play the same.
Good. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. All right. Really interesting idea, really interesting product. Chris, can you talk a little bit just about how the different languages work with this? Because I think that's a really interesting aspect of it.
Sure, I probably should have explained a bit more. So we have 10 different language versions of this, and each language covers the whole world. So there's no sense of this is an English language bit of technology. In the Swahili version, we cover the whole world in Swahili. In the Portuguese version, we cover the whole world in Portuguese. So we feel that anyone should be able to speak about anywhere in their own language very easily. And that's with the number of combinations of words we have, we could do that. So that's what we wanted to do.
But you were telling me something interesting backstage about how the languages are optimized for the place where they're spoken, right?
Yeah, that's right. So in the Portuguese version, we figured, well, this is most likely going to get used in Portugal and Brazil. So we put all of the very short Portuguese words in those countries. And if you're searching around in the north of Russia in a forest, you'll probably find a 3-word address like economically fundamentalist hypochondriac. And in Rio, it's table, chair, spoon. So there's a bit you can do to make that a better experience.
Tell me about homonyms, like just the way that you tried to imagine how the different 3-word names would be more memorable for people and how that sort of aspect of it works.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I should say the words are random, so they've got no meaning to the place. It's just meant to be a quick and easy reference, which is way easier than the coordinates. But once you've decided you're going to do that, we then try and optimize it as much as possible. So yeah, words like here, which you could spell H-E-R-E, H-E-A-R, the homophones, we take those out. We take out anything which could be offensive. We take out all sorts of words that could be confused for something else. So you end up with a very manually curated dictionary, but it does the job very well, and we do that in every language.
Are there challenges to building this massive grid in different languages and taking out words that are offensive and problematic? I mean, can you talk about the tech aspect of this, building this stuff?
It's actually, that part of it's pretty manual, but if you think about it, you've only got to compile that list of 40,000 words. The algorithm which then populates the world, yeah, that was hard to make, but we just did it once, and it's very scalable to be able to replicate that. So actually getting the list of words together is a pretty manual process, but it's not too time intensive, and it means that we can and should by the end of next year to be in pretty much every language, major language in the world.
So we got some of a sense of this from the presentation, but I'm from Marketplace, so I have to ask you, about your customer. I want to know about competition, and I want to hear about revenue for the company.
Okay, so revenue for the company is comes to us by charging any business who is actually going to make money out of using our technology. So if you assume that there's a big delivery company who are presented with 1,000 three-word addresses and they want to then sort those so they know which route they're taking them, anything in terms of batch processing, we give them software which will enable them to do that. And for that we charge. But the consumer app is free, and a lot of the businesses I just outlined actually just use the consumer app for free. But if there's a company which is used to doing more extensive process management, there'll be some charges there, but they would only do that if they knew they were going to actually optimize and save money. So they should be net better off.
There are different opportunities, I would imagine, for mature markets and for emerging markets. I would guess that this might be used in different ways here in New York than it might be used in some emerging markets and places where there's, I don't know, people are want this information for different reasons. Can you talk a little bit about how you're imagining this would be used in developed places and then undeveloped places, and how those are different?
Sure, and I think it's one of those things that everyone who comes across our technology uses it in a different way. If you're in the developing world and you never had an address and you can now use this so you have one, this affects loads of parts of your life. In the developed world, here in the US, there's people who don't struggle with their address, and there's some people who do. And we see plenty of people giving this to others where their address doesn't quite point to the right place on the map. And they're constantly on the phone to the delivery company going, no, it's left at the lamppost. And there are plenty of people who live like that here in the US. Now, thinking forwards, I think people also might alter their perception of what an address is, because we're taking this technology, these street addresses that have been with us for centuries or decades, and we're retrofitting them for modern technology. It kind of is a bit odd that you have maybe 12 streets of the same name in Denver, and the user has to scroll down a list and pick them out. Now, if drone delivery takes off, people don't want it to be dropped on their roof, right? They might say, okay, well, is this going in my back garden or my front garden? I think there's going to be a whole shift in the way that people think about an address and what is that, and is it really acceptable that this refers to maybe a 30 square meter area? I want to be able to be more precise. So I think we're seeing a bit of this, and I showed earlier the slide about Glastonbury Festival. They're using it, and there's loads of hikers who use it. An address means different things wherever you are, and I think that that's testament to the tech that people pick it up wherever they are in the world.
Tell me a little bit more about the story that you started to tell about in Brazil, in the favelas, and how that has played out since you guys first started to work in that area.
Sure. So we actually read an article on the company there and what they were doing. They'd effectively made their own map of that favela, but it was very reliant on a particular postman knowing where a certain person lived. And the whole process was very, very inefficient. So they'd built a business, but they suddenly had double the amount of customers, and it was pretty difficult for them to scale. So when we said, we've actually given you a ready-made system that you can use tomorrow, it was like, well, then we'll use it. It was just like, this is what we've needed, and we haven't needed. So they use the Portuguese version of the app. The postmen go out, they sample, if you like, the 3 words, they WhatsApp it back to the office, and they've built their own system just by using our tech. And now the next part of this is we're running a pilot with an e-commerce company. So people can actually type the 3 words in online. That 3 words then gets passed right the way through the chain, from the retailer to this local delivery company, and then it arrives at the door. So it acts as a normal address. So we're joining the dots with them, and it's working very well.
We didn't talk about competition yet, but do you see any competition to the types of things that you're building, or are you in places where there's not a lot of that yet?
So actually, after we built the 3-word system, we dismissed an idea which has actually been the basis of most of the competition so far. So a lot of people are aware of the problem of coordinates being too long for people to use, which is why they're not used. And there's been a couple of companies who've built an alphanumeric system. And they said, right, if we can't have 18 digits, let's compress this into an alphanumeric, which is 10 characters long. But that's like remembering one of those complicated old-style Wi-Fi passwords as either your address or, quick, come and meet me at B29L QX.4MP23W, and that's really hard.
I'll be right there.
And these are companies like TomTom and Google who've started these codes off, and they've failed to reach traction. So really, our tech hinges just on the human brain. That 3 words is infinitely easier to remember, even for a couple of seconds, to go, okay, I know what you mean, I'll type that in, or you look at it on your phone, you'll type into your computer. There's all these communication benefits, and that's just what we've exploited. So the competition continues to be these long alphanumerics, and we do what we do with words.
Have you seen an interest from other companies? You're trying to get your API out there. You're trying to get a bunch of different companies to work with what you've done. Is there a challenge there for you guys, trying to find partnerships and sort of build out the user base for what3words?
Sure, I think, like anyone, there's a challenge in terms of, is this the right time for somebody to change the way they're doing things? But there's been some good partnerships we've got. NavMeet, that app, they have 25 million users, the biggest offline mapping app in the world, and they immediately grabbed it. Esri, which is the world's biggest geospatial software company, have just built it in. The mapping agency of Norway has just built it in. These are guys who want to be first on stuff like this because they think it enhances their product. And some people will go, this sounds interesting, this system, I'll do it when other people do, but that's fine. There's a lot of people who want to be first, and that's good for us because they're happy to embrace it. So I think we have the same challenges as any business around adoption, but there's a big world out there where people are having really big problems, and if there's a clear benefit, people build it in.
I saw a lot of smartphones in the presentation. Can you talk a little bit about places where people are not using smartphones and they're just using cell phones? Is the experience different? How is it different? What have you built that might work better with sort of really simple mobile phones?
Sure. There's a couple of things there. So for a start, I think in a couple of years' time, all those people will probably have smartphones. But even now, let's say in the project in Tanzania, the guy who goes there and fits the mosquito trap has a smartphone. So he tells the person who lives there their 3-word address. Mm-hmm. And that person may not have a smartphone, but then when they go to a center and they go, right, what's your address? They've got the address. So there's plenty of uses when the person may not be finding their own 3-word address, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course.
So it fits in a number of ways.
You talked a little bit about drone delivery. Can you tell us 5 years from now, if everybody adopts this idea, what kind of change you hope to bring to the way people are using this all over the world? What's your dream? Tell me your dream.
I think our dream is that people should be able to communicate with as much accuracy as they want to. All of the technology is already built for people to talk about somewhere very precisely. We're just presenting it in a nicer way. So, yeah, I think people should all be talking with the accuracy of a couple of meters for the way they do everything in their life. I think the retrofitted street address system will become increasingly redundant. And I think you just won't need to use this system, which is very, very suboptimal for today's lifestyle. So I think, yeah, we see a future in which everyone should be able to speak very precisely. And a lot of the time, sure, a device may communicate a location to another device invisibly, in which case you don't need us. But as soon as the human gets involved, which is a lot of the time either showing them or taking an input from them, that's where a system like ours works really well. So yeah, I think street addresses will become redundant.
Chris Sheldrick, he's co-founder and CEO of what3words. Chris, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.